Goodison Park, February 1988. A banana lands a few feet from the man running onto it. He doesn't flinch. He doesn't even glance down. He simply drags it away with the outside of his boot, mid-stride, like a man brushing lint off a jacket, and keeps running toward goal. The image gets photographed. It gets printed. Decades later, people still call it one of the most haunting pictures in English football history. But here's what almost nobody asks about that photograph. Why did the best player in the country have to develop that particular skill in the first place? The skill of not reacting. Because in 1988, John Barnes wasn't just good. He was, by common consent, the most gifted footballer England had produced in a generation, and yet the national team built around him never figured out what to do with him. This is the story of how that happened, and it starts 8,000 miles away, on an island where nobody was throwing anything at him at all. John Barnes was born in Kingston, Jamaica, in 1963, the son of a senior Jamaican army officer who had once played football himself. The house ran on discipline, and the one soft indulgence in it was the ball at his son's feet. By the time John was old enough to walk, he was already being taught to compete. That changed at 12, when his father was posted to London and the family relocated. A military kid from Kingston dropped into English suburbs, playing park football for a non-league amateur side called Sudbury Court. As a central defender of all things, nobody scouted him. A taxi driver did. He happened to watch a Sudbury Court match, couldn't stop talking about the kid he'd seen, and mentioned it to a friend connected to Watford. Watford gave the teenager a trial. They didn't need long. The transfer fee, effectively, worked out to a kit bag of shirts and shorts. 6 years later, Watford sold that same player for close to £1 million. In between, something extraordinary happened. Under manager Graham Taylor, Watford rocketed from the second tier of English football to the runners-up spot in the entire top flight, then reached an FA Cup final, a fairy tale built substantially around a teenage winger nobody outside Hertfordshire had heard of a few years earlier. Then the whole world saw him at once. June 1984, the Maracanã Stadium, Rio de Janeiro. 100,000 Brazilians packed into the most intimidating cathedral in world football, watching England, a team given no chance whatsoever against the hosts. Just before halftime, a 20-year-old Barnes picks the ball up on the left and starts running at 4 Brazilian defenders like they aren't there. One goes, then another, then the goalkeeper. The ball ends up in the net. It remains, to this day, one of the greatest goals ever scored by an Englishman. And on the flight home, while the rest of the country celebrated, a section of England's own traveling support spent the journey insisting the goal shouldn't count because of who had scored it. Before the plane had even landed, the greatest moment of Barnes's international career had already been poisoned for him. He would later describe that goal as simultaneously the best and the cruelest thing that ever happened to him in an England shirt. 3 years on, the biggest club in the country came calling and found out that the poison hadn't stayed on that plane. Liverpool, under Kenny Dalglish, were assembling one of the most devastating attacking sides English football has ever seen. And in the summer of 1987, they added the country's most talented player to it. It should have been a formality. Instead, in the months before he signed, a rumor took hold around the city that had nothing to do with football at all, that black players couldn't cut it at the highest level, and that this one, specifically, wasn't wanted. Barnes received hostile letters before he had kicked a single ball for the club. He answered the only way he knew how, by having, statistically and stylistically, the greatest individual season English football had witnessed in years. Liverpool went 29 league games without defeat. Barnes glided past opponents as though the pitch had a different gravity for him. He scored 15 league goals from the wing, was named both the Football Writers' and the Players' Choice for Player of the Season in his very first year at the club, and Liverpool won the title with games to spare. Even Everton's own Goodison crowd, not known for generosity toward Liverpool players, would eventually applaud him off their pitch. Which brings the story back to that photograph. Because the abuse at Goodison wasn't an isolated incident, Barnes has spoken since about certain grounds where it happened almost weekly, not from one drunk voice in the crowd, but from sections of thousands. He has been direct about the fact that it never stopped mattering. even when he refused to let it show. The stillness after the backheel wasn't the absence of pain. It was the discipline his father had built into him since childhood, deployed his armor in real time, on camera, every single week, while he was simultaneously playing the best football of his life. A year later, football stopped mattering altogether for a while. In April 1989, 97 Liverpool supporters died at Hillsborough. Barnes has spoken about the strange, irrational guilt that settled over the entire squad in the weeks that followed, grieving families who had bought tickets simply to watch them play. Liverpool finished that devastated season by winning the FA Cup, then lost the league title in the campaign's final minute in one of the most dramatic collapses English football has ever produced. Barnes has called his own part in it, a moment he could have simply run the clock down and didn't, the single biggest regret of his career. The following year, he won the title again, his second, 22 league goals, Player of the Year for the second time. He was 26 years old, and it looked as though he had another decade at the very top ahead of him. Then, in the summer of 1992, he ruptured his Achilles tendon. He was 28. When he returned a year later, the explosive pace that had made him unplayable simply wasn't there anymore. Most players in that position fade out quietly. Barnes did the opposite. He rebuilt his entire game from the ground up, reinventing himself as a deep-lying midfielder who controlled matches with his mind instead of his legs, eventually captaining the club and mentoring the next generation of Liverpool Academy players who would go on to become stars in their own right. When he finally left in 1997, after a decade at Anfield, he had made over 400 appearances and won 2 league titles that the club would still be chasing a third of 30 years later. His England career never got that second act. 79 caps, and a national team that never quite worked out how to build itself around him. He was booed by sections of his own country's supporters, questioned over his commitment simply because he hadn't been born there, and asked, more than once, to simply play the way he played for Liverpool, as though that were a switch anyone could flip inside a system built for a different kind of football entirely. Which is really the whole story, told twice. A country that had the most gifted player of a generation, and instead of reshaping itself around him, asked him to shrink to fit. A club that did the opposite, and became legendary, partly because of it. Look at that photograph one more time. The banana on the turf, already behind him. Barnes mid-stride, eyes already up the pitch. It's usually remembered as a photograph about the ugliest side of football. It might be better understood as a photograph of the man who refused to let that be the whole story, and, for a generation of players who came after him, made it a little less likely that it would have to be.